Hello folks. Okay, this time I wanted to go through and talk about product rollout, deployment, installation, that side of things, right? Sooner or later your product is actually ready for people to use it, and you have to get it to them and you have to get it installed so that they can use it. We've all gone through this sort of a process, and we've had good experiences and bad experiences, I'm sure. You know, you've got the ones where you click on something and bang, it's ready to go. And you have the other ones that you fight with for hours or days, trying to look at all the different settings you have to tweak and all the different things that have to be installed first and configured correctly first. And eventually you either get so frustrated with it that you give up, or you fight your way through, but it leaves a lasting impression on you for that product, right? If you had a nightmare time trying to install it, you're gonna remember that. Or if you had a nightmarish time trying to upgrade it or put a patch in or whatever it might be, again, you're gonna remember that, and it has a big impact on how you think about the product and the company. So remember that when you're designing software and designing your rollouts and deployments. So if it's a complex system, there can be a lot of different parts that you have to get working for the whole system to work the way it's supposed to. Right? We have to make sure that we're ready for all of those pieces when the time comes for this to go live. And again, we might be talking about something where the user's just installing an app on their phone, or we might be talking about something where a company is installing some giant system that's going to be integrated with their web and with their databases and with other servers, and there's stuff that's on the business side of it and stuff that's on the client side of it, and there might be all sorts of different pieces that have to play together. Hardware, software, right? Networking, security portions. There's lots of different things that we might have to consider. So, this is all stuff that I want you to start thinking about. Anytime you're installing a new product, think about what must be involved from the development side to make that work. Okay, even if it's just a small client-side installation, something that's just going on a laptop and client-side only, or just going on a phone or whatever it might be, there's still a lot of different things that you have to think about. What kind of access rights are necessary? What kind of permissions are necessary? Does it have to do updates on paths or keys or the startup menu or whatever it might be? You know, what sort of things have to happen on that local device, that local machine, for this to work properly in the future? How much of that is user configurable, right? Can the user decide where this thing's going to go? What kind of an impact does that have? What kind of permissions is it given in the beginning? What kind of default options are you going to use? If somebody decides halfway through the installation that they want to bail out, how easy is that? Right? If your installation is on hour 3 and it shows that it's 10% done, how easy is it for the user to back out without messing up their system? Can the user have something installed multiple times? How easy is that? How difficult is that? Right? If your installation does things to things like the user's path, for instance, what happens if we try and have multiple installations at different locations? Right? What does that look like? What do your configuration options have to take into account if you're going to do that? What happens if the user installs multiple different versions of something and then uninstalls one of them? Right? So there are lots of things to consider. Again, so coming back to that point, if the user uninstalls, what do we do? If our installation changed some of their system settings, then do we remember which ones we changed and what they looked like before and reset them when they uninstall? Is that going to mess up anything else that's been installed since our product was installed? You have to think fairly carefully about what you're doing to the user system if you're changing settings. If a user goes through to uninstall and then reinstall, or just reinstall over top of the current install, if they had some custom settings from the first one, or some data left around from the first one, do we use that, or do we use a sort of fresh install? Right? Sometimes somebody's doing a reinstall because they want to kind of get a clean version and start over, so they probably don't want to use the stuff that they had previously. But other times, if they had a bunch of custom configuration and a bunch of data left around from the previous one, they do want to hang around, they do want to get that, they just want to get an up-to-date installation of the rest of it. So there are a lot of things to think about and to design into your install process. Similarly, when you're starting to look at patches and upgrades, if you've got a new version of something that's ready to go, or a fix, a security fix, or just a tweak or an improvement, how do you let the user know that this is ready to go? And how do you either let them choose to patch or upgrade, or try and push them into patching or upgrading? Again, how does this handle the existing data that they've got and the customized settings that they've got? Does it just overwrite them with the new ones, right, or with the basic ones, with the stock ones? Or does it try to recognize the customizations that they've done and configure the patch or the upgrade to adapt to those, to handle those? How far are you willing to go to support that, right? How flexible is your system when it comes to that kind of customization? If you are doing patches, suppose your system or your product has 50 different files and the patch affects 9 of them. To patch it, do we actually just completely replace 9 files? So does the patch essentially involve transferring those 9 files to the user system and just replacing them? Or maybe some of these files are massive, and the changes are just a tiny change somewhere deep within the file. Do we set up our patch so that instead of completely replacing the file, it just overwrites that tiny portion? So it does kind of a binary edit on a piece of that file. Right? Either is a valid approach, and either has its strengths and weaknesses. What kind of permissions does your patch or your upgrade actually need in order to be able to run? How easy is it for the user to run it safely? And again, you're trying to keep all of these things in mind as you're designing your patches, as you're designing your installations, as you're designing your upgrades. These are all things to consider. If you patch a system, does it give the exact same behavior as if they'd done a clean install of whatever the latest version is? Are you sure that your testing guarantees that they both give the same behavior? Are they identical or not? All things to consider. If you've got a lot of clients using your software, installing some item, whatever it might be, when we've got an upgrade or an update, again, do we try and push that new update out to everybody and force them to do an upgrade? Basically say you have to upgrade to blah 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 in order to continue using this, or do we give them the choice as to when they want to upgrade? And if we do that, is it a case of you're all familiar with the sort of auto updates versus manual? Do they have the choice to have everything just automated and it happens automatically, or do they want to automatically download but decide when to actually do the upgrade, or do they want to just be notified when something exists, or do they want to manually check themselves when an update exists? And again, different users are going to have different preferences. The forced upgrade can annoy some people that don't like it, especially if your upgrade changes some of the things that they currently like, or if it introduces new bugs or glitches. Again, we've all seen lots of software where a new version rolls out and it creates more problems than it solves. So, if we give them a choice, then the problem is that now we're going to have some users on the old version and some users on the new version, and we've got to have some kind of support for both. Or we tell them, you don't have to upgrade, but we're not supporting your old version. So again, lots of different choices that we can wind up making. And we've all encountered this, right? Using all the different wonderful software we play with all the time. Again, in terms of how to know whether there's a new version waiting, is there a mechanism where we can sort of push a notification out, Or do they regularly sort of call home, check some central site someplace to see if there's an update sitting and waiting? Again, both have advantages, both have problems. Again, depending on the user's connectivity, the settings that they've got on their system, and security and firewalls and all that kind of thing, there might be all sorts of issues to deal with there. If you've got a bigger system, something that's just not sort of a client-side, an app or a program on somebody's laptop someplace, if it's a big system with lots of different parts in it, are we going to try and deploy all of these at once, or do it in stages? If you do it in pieces, then the old pieces that you're replacing, so you've got 3 different components to your system, A, B, and C. If you want to just replace A right now, that means that your new A has to work with the old B and C. And then when you replace B, it means that your new A has to work with your new B and the old C. And then when you replace the C, it means all 3 new parts have to work together. It can be more complicated to design the compatibility so that all 3 pieces can work with both the old and the new. On the other hand, it can be a little riskier to go in and say, okay, well, we'll do it all at once. We'll tear down the old ABC and throw in the new ABC and hope it works. Again, advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. Or similarly, if you've got something that's going to be installed at lots of different sites. So I'm producing a new inventory system, and I've got 50 stores. Do I try it out on one store first and leave the other 49 on the old system? That way, if something goes wrong, only the one store is impacted. That has advantages, right? We're localizing where we need to test, and we're localizing the damage, if you like, if something goes wrong. But it does mean that the new system in that one site still somehow needs to be able to interact with the old system on the other 49 sites. As opposed to the approach where we say, oh, well, let's just do them all at once and hope for the best. Higher risk, but you don't have to design your system so that old and new have to work together. Now, part of this is going to be getting the client ready for whatever's going to happen. Right? If you've got a big system to roll out, then presumably you've got a fairly large organization as a client. Right? They might have lots of different employees doing lots of different work on this system, and they've got their own customers that might be interacting with the system. You have to make sure that everybody on their side is ready for what's going to be involved in the changeover from the old system to the new system. Again, it might involve them learning new software, it might involve them learning new processes, it might involve them getting used to different timelines for when things take place or how things take place. It means that they've got to be ready for the possibility that there are going to be hiccups when you first do this. Right? It means that things might happen a little slower, a little clunkier. There might be a few more mistakes the first week we roll this out than the old system that everybody was used to. Right? So you might have training involved. You might need extra support and technical staff on hand during that installation period and during the period where everybody's kind of getting used to the new system. So you have to be prepared for that. And management on the client side has to be prepared for that, right? They have to be prepared for the idea that, okay, we have to spend some time in advance getting people trained on the new system, and we have to be prepared to pay a little extra to have some extra support staff on hand and some extra people on hand that first week or the first couple of weeks or the first month or whatever it is to deal with the issues that might crop up. And again, their customers, their clients have to know that, okay, we're going to be switching over to a new system next week. This might impact you somewhat. If things go wrong, then we'll do this to try and make it up to you. Again, different things that they might need to consider. And as a developer, you want to make sure that you've let them know that they need to be aware of that they need to be preparing for that. Right? You've got to get the hardware and the software ready to go before the installation is going to take place. Right? You want to make sure that you've got all of the new hardware on hand, that you've tested it as well as you could, that you've configured it as well as possible, you've installed all the things that need to be installed, you've set up all the data that needs to be set up, and you're as ready as you can be to go through and say, okay, now it's time to unplug the old hardware, plug in the new hardware, fire up everything that needs to happen, and connect all the pieces together, cross your fingers, and hope things work. Right? There are lots of different pieces that can be involved in this. Again, you might have lots of different servers, lots of different gateways, lots of different networks, firewalls, all sorts of things to be configured correctly, as well as the actual software and operating systems and things that need to be installed and set up and configured, all the different permissions that need to be set up, the databases that need to be populated. Right? There are lots of things that might be involved in a process like this. And so you want to spend the time beforehand to document all of the steps that have to happen, to organize them, maybe to do some trial runs as best you can, right? To have scripts to automate this as much as possible so that you don't forget a step when the install actually happens. It can be a little chaotic during the install days. Right? Suppose you decide that we're going to shut everything down Friday night, and we're going to spend Saturday and Sunday going through and getting everything installed and configured and ready to go for Monday morning. That sort of Friday night, Saturday, Sunday night can be pretty chaotic. There can be a lot of different things going on. It can be really easy to miss a step if you're doing things manually, to forget a setting or to type something in wrong, or just to mess up one little thing that has all sorts of repercussions later in the install. So as much as possible, you want to try and automate that process, right? Write scripts to do as much of this as you can, and test those scripts ahead of time. Right? So there are a lot of pieces to think about as you're doing this. Right? Document it all. Automate it as much as possible. Right? Have good documentation, have good guides, have them thoroughly reviewed before you get to that weekend where you're going to do this big changeover. Again, wherever possible, use scripts, use tools to automate it if you can. Doing things manually is error prone. It's easy for people to make mistakes, especially when they're a little panicked, a little stressed, a little tired. So again, we want to make sure that we can trust that this deployment process is going to work, which means testing it as well as we can ahead of time, getting something as close to the real install environment as we can and trying it out. Now, this can be really challenging, right? If you've got something that involves a lot of specialized hardware and a lot of specialized machinery and some big data sets and whatnot, it can be difficult to create an ideal environment to test this in. But you want to get as close as you can to having a simulation of this installation process so that you've got some confidence and the client has some confidence that this is going to work when you do it for real. And of course, you want your contingency plans. What if something does go wrong? What if we get to Sunday afternoon and nothing is working and it doesn't look like we're going to have it working tomorrow morning? What happens then? Is the business prepared to stay down for a few days or whatever it takes until you actually figure out what's going wrong and have it fixed and have the new system up and running? Or do you have some kind of a backup plan where you can say, well, if at 9 a.m. Sunday it doesn't look like things are going to work for Monday morning, is it possible for us to roll back to the old system? Or to a piece of it, to enough of it to keep things functional Monday morning while we figure out the rest of it? Sometimes it's not possible. Even if you have what you think is a good plan to roll back to the old system, what happens if you decide, okay, well, we'll go back and we'll reinstall the old system, and the reinstall on that doesn't work because they've been using this for 20 years and there were a bunch of things that they did 20 years ago that weren't documented and that nobody remembers, and you can't get things back to the way they used to be. Right? That is a very real possibility. What do you have in the way of contingency plans? What's the risk? What are the chances that this isn't going to work? What are the risks? What's the impact for the business if it doesn't work? And what are we going to do about it? And again, you want to make sure that the client is mentally prepared for that possibility. Right? You don't want to kid them into thinking, it'll be fine, and then have something blow up and have them really angry because all of a sudden, Monday morning rolls around and they're out of business for the week. So you want to make sure everybody's adequately warned about and prepared for what can go wrong, and that you've thought about that and you've planned it, right? You're not just kind of blindly stumbling forward and hoping for the best. So lots of things to think about. Again, these are problems that you'll run into for real once you escape this place and you're not writing just the little local programs that we're playing with here. But it is something to think about. And anytime you're using software now, think about what must have been involved in getting that up and running. What might that have looked like? All right, we'll leave it there for now.